By watching today's video, you're going to master cooking tofu once and for all. So many people think tofu is bland and spongy, but treated correctly and it can take on so many different flavors and textures. In this video, you'll learn the best tofu cooking methods, preparation techniques, and of course, some delicious ways of flavoring it. Oh, and by the way, my name is George. I've been a chef for 10 years and I love cooking plant-based food. So let's get started with cooking some tofu. For the purpose of this video, we'll be focusing on two types of tofu, which are the most commonly found in supermarkets. These are firm and extra firm. If you are based in America, then I believe extra firm tofu is often called super firm, so just bear that in mind. For each cooking method in this video, I'll recommend which type of tofu I believe will give you the best result. This first cooking technique is great for people who are still on the fence about tofu. It's these umami and savory tofu crumbles. They are the perfect replacement for ground beef. Drying out the tofu gives it a lovely chewy texture and concentrated flavor. You can then rehydrate it in a sauce, for example in bolognese, in chili, or you can add some chipotle and use it in tacos. To save on washing up, I'm adding the flavorings straight to the bowl that we're going to crumble in the tofu, starting with some dark and light soy sauce. Next up, a teaspoon of Marmite, or you could use some red miso if you can't get Marmite. Both the soy sauce and the Marmite adding a lovely umami rich flavor. Then we'll add a tablespoon of nutritional yeast for a lovely savory and nutty note. Half a teaspoon of granulated garlic. I prefer to use this over fresh just to avoid the risk of the garlic burning. Then 1 tablespoon of tomato puree. And that's it, we're just going to whisk this together and then we'll crumble in the tofu. You can definitely add more seasonings, but this is just going to be a sort of basic foundation recipe. For example, if you're going to use it in a chili, you could of course add some chili, some chipotle, you could add some dried oregano, that sort of thing. I'm using extra firm tofu here, which is going to be lovely and chewy and give this a really nice texture. This is actually smoked tofu, so it's going to add even more flavor. You can just do this with regular tofu, of course. Maybe add some smoked paprika, that might be nice. And then once that's crumbled, just mix it into the flavorings. If you've got time, let this marinate for 30 minutes or even overnight if you can. But if not, don't worry, it's still gonna be really tasty. And you can pan fry, bake, or air fry. I'm going to be air frying just because we've got a lot of tofu to cook today and it's definitely the quickest method. So spread the tofu out either onto a baking tray or into your air fryer. And the goal now is to get this chewy, caramelized, and really concentrated in flavor. Just realized I didn't add any oil, so just add about a tablespoon, or you can keep it oil-free, it's up to you. So your tofu is done when it's got a lovely dark and rich color. It's nice and chewy, and it's gonna smell just absolutely incredible at this point. You can now add this into a lovely, rich, bubbling tomato sauce to make yourself a delicious bolognese with lots of umami, rich flavor. Whether you're plant-based or not, that is going to be incredibly delicious. This next technique is incredibly underrated and takes no time at all. It's simmering your tofu in salted water. This may sound counterproductive, but doing this gives your tofu a lovely, firm and slightly bouncy texture. It seasons the tofu from within and it opens up the tofu structure to allow for better absorption of flavorings. This method is definitely one of my favorites because it is so simple, but you can get some really great results with it. I'm using firm tofu, which I'm just cutting into cubes. I find because it's quite soft, tearing it can be quite risky, as when you add it to the hot water, it can sort of fall apart a little bit. The key to this simmered tofu is to salt the water quite heavily. So we're going in with a tablespoon of salt for 1 liter of water. Adding enough salt is essential for osmosis to happen so that the water comes out and the seasoned water goes in. If you don't add enough salt, you'll end up with soggy tofu, which you definitely do not want. You can add some seasonings to this water. For example, for an Asian style, I'm going to add some coriander seeds and some fennel seeds. I'm also going to add 1 garlic clove and some ginger, some dark soy sauce, which is of course more salt, and a touch of rice wine vinegar. And then just add your tofu and we'll let that simmer for around 5 to 10 minutes. Make sure all your tofu is covered as well. For an even simpler method, you can just add your tofu to boiling salty water and leave it for maybe 15 minutes. You don't even need to put it in a pan and simmer it. This is just a quicker way because we can do it in about 5 minutes. You can do this with extra firm tofu, but I tend not to as it's already quite firm and less likely to absorb any flavor from the liquid. You can then strain off your tofu and definitely keep the liquid, as that's going to make an amazing ramen or soup, which definitely won't need any seasoning. This tofu is firm, it's juicy, it's kind of bouncy, as you saw it fly off the plate, and it's been beautifully seasoned from within. This tofu is great as it is. I love it just with some veggies and some rice, for example, or you can add it to ramens, curries, and broths and all that sort of thing. You can also go on to then fry it, bake it, glaze it. It's really versatile. Next up, we're going to be roasting whole blocks of tofu, perfect for a Sunday roast, an easy weeknight dinner, or sliced up and put into a sandwich. For this whole roasted tofu, it is really simple. We've just got a block of firm tofu here, and we're going to give it a good press in a tea towel. No need to press it for 10-15 minutes. We're just going to give it a squeeze in a tea towel for literally 30 seconds. Mainly just to get rid of the surface moisture and a little bit of the moisture inside. Be gentle with it, as firm tofu can be a little bit delicate. I believe I first saw this whole roasted tofu block done by Derek Sarno, so there's another shout out for him. To a bowl, I'm going to add some thick vegan yogurt, or you could add vegan mayonnaise. And then to that, I'm going to add some Dijon mustard and just simply mix that together. Get your tofu onto a plate, and we're going to simply spread over this yogurt and mustard mix. And this is going to be what we use to stick the seasonings to the tofu. Just being careful not to break up the tofu too much, and you only need a thin layer. We'll then add our seasoning. I'm going to use this chicken seasoning, which contains no chicken, but lots of really nice, lovely spices like paprika, garlic, parsley, lemon peel, thyme, sage. It's really nice. It should really be called tofu seasoning, but oh well. And then we're just going to roll the tofu through the seasoning, getting every side nicely coated. This bit can be quite tricky because your fingers will take the seasoning off, so try to not touch it in too many places. Once I've got it mostly covered, I'll then just sort of sprinkle over some seasoning on the parts which haven't been covered. This is going to make a really nice crust on the tofu. And then transfer the tofu onto parchment paper. Then transfer this to an air fryer or onto a baking tray if you're going to roast it. Optionally, drizzle over a little olive oil. And then we'll roast this for about 35 to 45 minutes. Okay, so this is halfway through the cooking process, and I'm going to turn it over. I've also put it into a heat-proof dish just to make it a little bit less messy. Now for an optional extra, we're going to do a lemon, herb, and garlic topping. So we'll start by adding some more vegan yogurt to a small bowl, just enough to make a layer on top of the tofu. And once again, you can use vegan mayo here if you want. And then to that, we're going to add some finely chopped mint and parsley, but you can use any herbs that you like, whether that's coriander, chives, tarragon. It's totally up to you. Then I'm going to zest in some lemon, quarter of a lemon, I'd say, or a third. Don't want it to be too citrusy. And then we're going to zest in 1 garlic clove as well. And you can do any flavored yogurt / mayo topping. You could do a spicy harissa one, or you could do a sort of curried mayo topping. It just adds a really nice sort of indulgent, creamy layer to the top of the tofu. And then just season with salt and pepper and give it a good mix. I'm going to add some nutritional yeast as well. And then just spread that on top of your tofu. A nice even layer. And then we'll get that cooking again. The topping has set and it's gone lovely and golden, and it's going to add a lovely creamy herby topping to this baked tofu. Now the only problem with this recipe is you'll probably fight over who gets the end piece. Marinating is one of the best ways to flavor tofu, but in its natural form, tofu isn't actually that good at absorbing marinades. By freezing tofu, the water inside turns to ice crystals. Those ice crystals then create holes in the structure of the tofu. When you then defrost and press the tofu, you're left with a much more open, sponge-like texture, perfect for absorbing delicious marinades. It also gives the tofu a more chewy texture. Okay, so I've got my firm tofu that has been previously frozen and now defrosted. So we're just gonna remove it from its little water bath. Freezing the tofu is really as simple as it sounds. You don't have to remove it from its original packaging. Just chuck it in the freezer, let it freeze overnight, and then you can defrost it when you want to use it. So what I do is I just grab the tofu between my hands and give it a good old squeeze, just being careful not to break it up. And if we look at the side of the tofu, you'll see there's loads of little holes in it from freezing and defrosting it, and that's going to help absorb the marinade. I do like to give it a quick press in a tea towel, and I find it's easiest if you first cut it into strips. I find when you do it with a whole block of tofu, you risk sort of breaking it apart, and you're not actually able to get out much of the water. So at this point, you'll want to press the tofu, for example, with a heavy book or with a large pan, that sort of thing. And you want to do that for at least 30 minutes, ideally an hour, to remove the excess moisture. There are, of course, so many marinades you can make. Today, I'm going to make a chipotle and orange one. So we'll start with some chipotle paste, of course. And then I don't actually have an orange, I've got a satsuma here, but it'll do the trick. So I'm just gonna add the zest of this satsuma, and we're going to add the juice as well. They weren't particularly juicy, so I'm going to add a splash of red wine vinegar as well. Then a touch of soy sauce to really season it nicely. And then 1 garlic clove, I'm just going to zest it in. That makes it really nice and fine, so it's going to flavor the tofu really easily. It's going to be nice and pungent. And then my brother made this candied squash for Christmas. He also gave us this lovely sweet sort of squash syrup that came from the crystallization process. So I'm just going to add about a teaspoon of that instead of using maple syrup. I was thinking of making a really nice sticky ginger cake with this. And that's it, just give it a quick whisk and that is the marinade done. Now that I've sliced the tofu, you can really see that porous texture, which is going to absorb the marinade really nicely. So just add your tofu to a shallow dish or into a sandwich bag and then pour over your marinade. Give it a little shake, turn the tofu around a couple times. You can now leave this for half an hour for the flavors to really come together. For the recipe, I might adapt it and just increase it a little bit so you've got a little bit more marinade left to glaze it afterwards. As you can see, it's almost been too effective and it has absorbed all of that marinade. So I'm just going to tear this into sort of bite-sized chunks and then I'm going to get it into the air fryer. I find with marinated tofu, the best way to cook it is to grill it on a nice high temperature. This means you get a nice crispy outside, but you keep the inside lovely and moist and juicy. So I'm going to add a drizzle of olive oil to this and give it a quick toss. And then I'm just going to simply grill it in my air fryer. So while we've got some delicious tofu ready to go, I thought I'd show you another technique for adding flavor, and that is with a glaze. I made a bit more of that marinade and we're just going to whisk in some corn flour. So just whisk in your corn flour. You can then add this to a pan and heat it up. And then once it heats up, the corn flour will thicken the sauce and you can throw in your tofu and then just toss to coat. And this means you're going to have tofu that's been marinated on the inside, but also glazed on the outside. So it's going to be incredibly flavorsome. Next up is a really simple preparation technique that makes use of the chewiness and firmness of extra firm tofu. So getting really nice crunchy tofu starts with how you prepare it. And one way to do it is grate it. In general, the more surface area you create on the tofu, the crispier it's going to get. So grating is really great for that, literally. Another method is to thinly slice the tofu. And for all these methods, I'm using extra firm tofu. This is great in wraps like a shawarma or a Greek gyros wrap. Another method is to do these thin sort of slabs, once again creating lots of surface area. Not quite as much as the other two, but still a really good amount for getting crispy. Now when it comes to flavoring the tofu that we've grated or thinly sliced, you can add in liquid flavorings before we start cooking. And this is because it's going to be cooked really quickly on a high temperature and there isn't a risk of the flavorings being burnt. Whereas if you added these liquid flavorings to tofu that was being cooked for say half an hour, it's likely the liquid would get too reduced and sticky and just end up burning and sticking to your pan. On this grated tofu, for example, I've done sesame oil, soy sauce, and a little maple syrup. Or on the sliced tofu, you could do a harissa-based marinade. This is harissa, olive oil, pomegranate molasses, and some tomato puree. And finally, for simply roasted, air-fried, or pan-fried tofu with a dry seasoning rub, here are a few of my top tips. This next tip is for when you're using a bunch of different dry seasonings. Always add them to a bowl first and give them a good whisk, because otherwise one bit of tofu will have all the smoked paprika, another will have all the turmeric, and it just won't be evenly distributed. I'd also recommend adding your starch of choice to the seasoning to get the tofu nice and crispy. Personally, I use arrowroot powder for baking and air frying, and I use corn flour for pan frying. I found that if you use corn flour in baking and air frying, it can go a bit chalky. And then I found that if you use arrowroot powder in pan frying, it can get a little bit too sticky. This next tip I got from Rainbow Plant Life, and it is to use a small sieve to distribute the seasoning over your tofu. Especially when doing these little slabs of tofu, it makes it so much easier to get it nice and evenly covered. You can then just turn it over and do the other side. If I'm doing tofu chunks or cubes of tofu, then I'll just throw it in the bowl and give it a good mix together, and that is perfectly seasoned. So here are a few ways of preparing your tofu that are a bit more interesting than just standard cubes. And I may have got slightly distracted by my puppy Poppy, and the grated and sliced tofu got a little bit extra crispy. For a few more delicious tofu recipes, check out this video.